Hey family, this is day 63 of our Reading Through the Bible Together in a Year series. Today we're in the book of Joshua, Yehoshua. We're doing chapters 8 and 9. Now, before this, remember Joshua and the Israelites are in the promised land. They've conquered Jericho. And the first thing that goes wrong is that Achan, he decides to take some of the plunder for himself that is supposed to be devoted to destruction or given to the temple. And so Yahweh is not with them as they try to conquer Ai, right? They attack Ai, and the king of Ai and his people come out and they beat the Israelites. And so Joshua wonders what's wrong. God points at Achan, says Achan has done what he's not supposed to do. And so Joshua gets Achan together and all of his family, and Achan makes the confession. And Achan and all of his family, his culture, the concept of Achan just gets obliterated and wiped out. And it's we had some meditation at the end of yesterday about that and how difficult that can be to swallow. But that's where we are in the narrative, and so let's keep going and see what happens next. Yahweh said to Yehoshua, "Don't be afraid and don't be dismayed. Take all the warriors with you, and arise, go up to Ai. Behold, I have given into your hand the king of Ai, with his people, his city, and his land. You shall do to Ai and her king as you did to Jericho and her king, except you shall take its goods and its livestock for yourselves. Set an ambush for the city behind it." So Yehoshua arose with all the warriors to go up to Ai. Yehoshua chose 30,000 men, the mighty men of valor, and sent them out by night. He commanded them, saying, "Behold, you shall lie in ambush against the city, behind the city. Don't go very far from the city, but all of you be ready. I and all the people who are with me will approach the city. It shall happen, when they come out against us, as at the first, that we will flee before them. They will come out after us until we have drawn them away from the city, for they will say, 'They flee before us like the first time.' So we will flee before them, and you shall rise up from the ambush and take possession of the city, for Yahweh your God will deliver it into your hand. It shall be, when you have seized the city, that you shall set the city on fire. You shall do this according to Yahweh's word. Behold, I have commanded you." Yehoshua sent them out, and they went to set up the ambush and stayed between Bethel and Ai on the west side of Ai. But Yehoshua stayed among the people that night. Yehoshua rose up early in the morning, mustered the people, and went up, he and the elders of Israel, before the people to Ai. All the people, even the men of war who were with him, went up and came near, and came before the city and encamped on the north side of Ai. Now there was a valley between him and Ai. He took about 5,000 men and set them in ambush between Bethel and Ai, on the west side of the city. So they set the people, even all the army who was on the north of the city, and their ambush on the west of the city. And Yehoshua went that night into the middle of the valley. When the king of Ai saw it, they hurried and rose up early, and the men of the city went out against Israel to battle, he and all his people, at the time appointed, before the Arava. But he didn't know that there was an ambush against him behind the city. Yehoshua and all Israel made as if they were beaten before them, and fled by the way of the wilderness. All the people who were in the city were called together to pursue after them. They pursued Yehoshua and were drawn away from the city. There was not a man left in Ai or Bethel who didn't go out after Israel. They left the city open and pursued Israel. Yahweh said to Yehoshua, "Stretch out the javelin that is in your hand toward Ai, for I will give it into your hand." Yehoshua stretched out the javelin that was in his hand toward the city. The ambush arose quickly out of their place, and they ran as soon as he had stretched out his hand and entered into the city and took it. They hurried and set the city on fire. When the men of Ai looked behind them, they saw, and behold, the smoke of the city ascended up to heaven, and they had no power to flee this way or that way. The people who fled to the wilderness turned back on their pursuers. When Yehoshua and all Israel saw that the ambush had taken the city, and that the smoke of the city ascended, then they turned back and killed the men of Ai. The others came out of the city against them, so they were in the middle of Israel, some on this side and some on that side. They struck them so that they let none of them remain or escape. They captured the king of Ai alive and brought him to Yehoshua. When Israel had finished killing all the inhabitants of Ai in the field, in the wilderness in which they pursued them, and they had all fallen by the edge of the sword until they were consumed, all Israel returned to Ai and struck it with the edge of the sword. All that fell that day, both of men and women, were 12,000, even all the people of Ai. For Yehoshua didn't draw back his hand with which he stretched out the javelin until he had utterly destroyed all the inhabitants of Ai. Yisrael took for themselves only the livestock and the goods of that city, according to Yahweh's word which he commanded Yehoshua. So Yehoshua burned Ai, and made it a heap forever, even a desolation to this day. He hanged the king of Ai on a tree until the evening. At sundown Yehoshua commanded, and they took his body down from the tree and threw it at the entrance of the gate of the city, and raised a great heap of stones on it that remains to this day. Then Yehoshua built an altar to Yahweh, the God of Israel, on Mount Ebal, as Moshe the servant of Yahweh commanded the children of Israel, as it is written in the book of the law of Moshe. An altar of uncut stones, on which no one had lifted up any iron. They offered burnt offerings on it to Yahweh and sacrificed peace offerings. He wrote there on the stones a copy of Moshe's law, which he wrote in the presence of the children of Israel. All Israel, with their elders, officers, and judges, stood on both sides of the ark before the Levitical priests, who carried the ark of Yahweh's covenant, the foreigner as well as the native, half of them in front of Mount Geritzim, and half of them in front of Mount Ebal, as Moshe, the servant of Yahweh, had commanded at the first, that they should bless the people of Israel. Afterward he read all the words of the law, the blessing and the curse, according to all that is written in the book of the law. There was not a word of all that Moshe commanded which Yehoshua didn't read before all the assembly of Israel, with the women, the little ones, and the foreigners who were among them. When all the kings who were beyond the Yarden, in the hill country, and in the lowland, and on all the shore of the great sea in front of Lebanon, the Hittite, the Amorite, the Canaanite, the Perizzite, the Hivite, and the Jebusite, heard of it, they gathered themselves together to fight with Yehoshua, and with Israel with one accord. But when the inhabitants of Giv'on heard what Yehoshua had done to Jericho and to Ai, they also resorted to a ruse, and went and made as if they had been ambassadors, and took old sacks on their donkeys, and old torn up and bound wineskins, and old and patched sandals on their feet, and wore old garments. All the bread of their food supply was dry and moldy. They went to Yehoshua at the camp of Gilgal, and said to him and to the men of Israel, "We have come from a far country. Now therefore make a covenant with us." The men of Israel said to the Hivites, "What if you live among us? How could we make a covenant with you?" They said to Yehoshua, "We are your servants." Yehoshua said to them, "Who are you? Where do you come from?" They said to him, "Your servants have come from a very far country because of the name of Yahweh your God. For we have heard of his fame, all that he did in Egypt, and all that he did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Yarden, to Sihon king of Heshbon, and to Og king of Bashan, who was at Ashtaroth. Our elders and all the inhabitants of our country spoke to us, saying, 'Take supplies in your hand for the journey, and go to meet them. Tell them, we are your servants. Now make a covenant with us. This our bread we took hot for our supplies out of our houses on the day we went out to go to you. But now, behold, it is dry, and it has become moldy. These wineskins which we filled were new, and behold, they are torn. These, our garments and our sandals, have become old because of the very long journey.' The men sampled their provisions and didn't ask counsel from Yahweh's mouth. Yehoshua made peace with them and made a covenant with them to let them live. The princes of the congregation swore to them. At the end of 3 days after they had made a covenant with them, they heard that they were their neighbors and that they lived among them. The children of Israel traveled and came to their cities on the 3rd day. Now their cities were Giv'on, Chephirah, Be'erot, and Kiriath Ye'arim. The children of Israel didn't strike them because the princes of the congregation had sworn to them by Yahweh, the God of Israel. All the congregation murmured against the princes. But all the princes said to all the congregation, "We have sworn to them by Yahweh, the God of Israel. Now therefore we may not touch them. We will do this to them and let them live, lest wrath be on us, because of the oath which we swore to them." The princes said to them, "Let them live." So they became woodcutters and drawers of water for all the congregation, as the princes had spoken to them. Yehoshua called for them, and he spoke to them, saying, "Why have you deceived us, saying, 'We are very far from you,' when you live among us? Now therefore you are cursed, and some of you will never fail to be slaves, both woodcutters and drawers of water from the house of my God." They answered Yehoshua and said, "Because your servants were certainly told how Yahweh your God commanded his servant Moshe to give you all the land, and to destroy all the inhabitants of the land from before you. Therefore we were very afraid for our lives because of you, and have done this thing. Now behold, we are in your hand. Do to us as it seems good and right to you to do." He did so to them, and delivered them out of the hand of the children of Israel, so that they didn't kill them. That day Yehoshua made them woodcutters and drawers of water for the congregation and for Yahweh's altar to this day, in the place which he should choose. So this is kind of an interesting story here, right? Men from the land of Canaan, the men of Gibeon, they're part of the people that God is supposed to be driving out from before the Israelites. They catch wind of what's going on, and they go to Joshua and pretend to be foreigners from just a faraway, strange land who are there to be with Yahweh's people because they've heard the great things about Yahweh. And so they're lying, right? They're lying to Joshua, but it's because they don't want to be wiped out, and they recognize that they will be wiped out. And so they lie, and they say, we're from far away. And Joshua's like, how do we know? And the men from Gibeon are just like, just believe us. Look at our worn out clothes. Look at our moldy bread. Clearly we're from far away. And there's a specific verse in chapter 9, verse 14, where the men of Israel partake with a meal with Gibeon, and they don't ask counsel from the Lord, and therefore they make a covenant with them. So I think this is just an interesting point where God doesn't interrupt and say, hey, Joshua, these guys are lying to you. You need to take them out. God waits for Joshua to ask Yahweh what's going on, but Joshua never does, right? He just assumes things are fine. He trusts these foreigners who are lying to them, and therefore he ends up making a covenant. And because the covenant is made under the eyes of Yahweh, now Joshua and Israel are caught in this place where they can't go back on their word, but they also weren't supposed to make that covenant in the first place. So it's this rough situation, and the Gibeonites end up being workers and slaves of Israel. And Yahweh doesn't intervene at all. Yahweh doesn't say anything about this. And so I think that's just an interesting that that detail is there, that they don't ask counsel of Yahweh. And it's to say that, well, because they didn't ask God and what was going on, they did something that wasn't according to what Yahweh had planned, but that doesn't mean that Yahweh intervenes. That just means that Israel's going to have to reap the consequences that we will see a little bit tomorrow, but definitely down the line. There's a problem that all of the Canaanites and all of their cultural ways don't get wiped out before Israel takes up residency. Like, that comes into play in the entire biblical story past that of Israel and worshiping other gods and all that stuff. I mean, it starts foundationally in Joshua and Judges and whether or not they do get rid of all of the Canaanites. So I just think that's an interesting story. It's a good thing to focus on. But that's all I got. So I hope you have a wonderful day.